This sitting is now resumed. Prior to the suspension, the business of the day was order number 2. To that, we revert. Now, our member for Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to reiterate to this House the focus of the government of Barbados is to, where possible, make sure that business facilitation forms part of the economic recovery and transformation that we expect to undertake over the next few years. And so as I rise to wrap up this particular debate on the amendment to the Barbados Revenue Authority Act, there are a few things that I wish to bring to the attention of members, but certainly to the public, that we believe that this is just the first step in order to be able to achieve the objectives that we've set out for this country. And so the Revenue Authority, and I just want to assure the member for St. George North who raised some issues earlier, that the country must be reminded that whilst it might appear as if we've been in government for 4 years, because it seems as if we've done 4 years of work already, it is just short of 4 weeks that this government has actually been in office. And so therefore, the concerns which the member for St. George North raised with respect to the expectations of persons in this country, with respect to the settlement of taxes and refunds on those issues, the public, through you, Mr. Speaker, as we seek to bring the public finances back to order in this country, the public can be assured that as we do that, that the natural order with respect to the payment of refunds, whether it's on the personal income tax, whether it's on VAT, you name it, that so long as the public finances are in order, which the Barbados Civil Party certainly has a rich track record of managing, then that confidence in the public, I think, will be fulfilled. And so therefore, we are just short of 4 weeks. There's still plenty of work to be done to effect the changes that the people of Barbados expect. And so therefore, the Ministry of Finance and certainly the rest of the government, we are working to make sure that the good order of the public finances are reinstated. I wish to also reflect on some of the submissions from the members, and I think the Honourable Attorney General would raise some interesting points. And I think from our perspective in the Ministry of Finance, one of the challenges with respect to taxation and the payment of taxation is that over the years, the National Insurance Scheme would have done a wonderful job in raising awareness specifically amongst self-employed persons as to their need to be able to support and at least be able to set aside their contributions for national insurance. And Mr. Speaker, I can say to you that over the last 2 years, as I have run a number of tax clinics in my constituency, one of the things that came up time and time again is that there are a number of self-employed persons who believe that once they pay their national insurance contributions, that they have done right in terms of their statutory obligations. And so therefore, to the Honourable Attorney General's point, we believe very strongly that another program of public awareness with respect to taxation ought to be undertaken, such that people in this country know what their statutory obligations are with respect not just to national insurance, but also to taxation. And I think certainly with respect to the delivery of public services, I believe once that program is successfully executed, then people would see the need, not just that, it's not that people aren't paying, is that some people actually believe that once they have made their national insurance contributions, that they have made all the contributions that they think that they should. Whether erroneously or not, it's a perception, and it's something that we have to move very swiftly to be able to remedy. Mr. Speaker, we, certainly in the Ministry of Finance, we are also equally concerned, and it's something that we are in the process of reviewing. In the spirit of enhancing the business environment, as well as to make sure that there are no hindrances to transacting business, we also know in the same vein that this Barbados Revenue Authority Act was implemented with respect to the tax clearances in 2014. We also know that the previous administration would have introduced a requirement for the annual filing for all companies in Barbados. They introduced a fee of $100 for the annual filings. And whilst, Mr. Speaker, on the face of it, yes, you need to collect information to determine whether directors are changing and who are the directors of companies, and certainly the government fully supports that position for transparency purposes. What has happened is that obviously there are a number of businesses who, because of the way they're operating and perhaps needs to enhance their own operations, a number of businesses have been caught in the net with respect to this $10 a day penalty, such that companies now, small, medium, large, are now faced with these outstanding penalties, which again now represents a hindrance to conducting business simply because of a position that a previous government would have made. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is something that this new government will revisit, because in the spirit of business facilitation, we shall endeavor to make sure that every business in this country can conduct their business in a manner, as I said, that's conducive for growth in the economy. And whilst it should never be the intention, Mr. Speaker, of any government to impose something unknowingly to economic agents in the economy that then can come back later to be a hindrance. And so we certainly want to give the public, through you, Mr. Speaker, the assurance that we shall revisit that particular policy. We will have the appropriate consultations as we've done with all of the measures that we've pretty much brought to date in this Parliament, to make sure that a level of certainty can return to the business community, because these are things, Mr. Speaker, that will keep people up at night, because people want to be able to invest, and if these policies create an environment where, for whatever reason, whether it's through tax clearances or what have you, that we need to remove that hurdle and that burden from the minds of business people, from the minds of ordinary Barbadians who might just register a business and with the intent of starting up as they're still in the planning phase, but yet you will be faced with this $10 a day money when you're actively not trading. And so therefore, whilst we accept that there's need for transparency with respect to the changing of directors and that information with respect to filing, we certainly don't think that this is the appropriate mechanism, that with respect to penalties, that it's good for transacting business in the country. Mr. Speaker, certainly the Barbados Revenue Authority has some work to do. And the Ministry of Finance is in the process of laying out the appropriate data strategy, which would allow for the sharing of information, obviously confidentially, but ensuring that we use every single tool available to the revenue authorities to be able to determine who is tax compliant and who is not. And so therefore, I can say to this honourable chamber that over the course of the coming months, we shall be using all available information in the context of the government to make sure that the efficient use of resources to be able to determine who are those taxpayers that perhaps are non-compliant, and determine who are the ones that the tax authorities need to focus on. And to that extent, I give, through you, Mr. Speaker, the assurance to the people of Barbados that the Revenue Authority is not going to represent Zacharias as the member for St. George North. Sorry, as the member for St. George North suggested, but that the revenue authorities represent simply the vehicle through which the provision of good public services to the citizens of Barbados can be derived, such that the staff are not seen as the bad guys in this arrangement, because these are the people that we rely on to be able to interface with the public, to interface with the business community, to be able to help deliver the very public services that every citizen would like to see in this country. And so there will be, over the course of the next few months, some additional training put in place, not just at the Revenue Authority, but certainly across the different agencies that collect revenue as far as government is concerned. We shall be working very hard to make sure that we make it easier for the collection of taxation. We shall, at the earliest opportunity, move to a fully digitized set of solutions which will stop Barbadians from having to stand up in lines to pay bills or taxes or what have you, simply because the facilitation of business, whether personal or commercial in this country, Mr. Speaker, is top of mind for this government. And we certainly intend to put those mechanisms in place such that ordinary Barbadians, business people, investors can feel that Barbados is a place where business can be done in a manner that is conducive to good economic growth. Mr. Speaker, it is certainly a long time in coming for the people of Barbados, but we believe that the bill as presented here in the House today starts the process through which we can start to see the level of confidence return to the economy, that businesses can get a clear sense as to what will be the operating environment for commerce in this country, that people and ordinary citizens who have to go about their business can do so relatively hassle-free, knowing that the Revenue Authority is not there looming large in order to prevent them from doing their business. Mr. Speaker, this Barbados Labour Party government is serious about doing business in this country. And I think certainly the pace that the Honourable Prime Minister has set for the government so far, I think the public servants have responded very favorably. The private sector have responded very favorably. The labour movement, they've also responded very favorably. And I believe the whole country is now breathing a sigh of relief that it has a government who intends to tackle the very problems that confront this country. And so, as I said earlier, this is just one step of many steps that will come to this honourable chamber, which I believe and I know will go a long way to making people believe in this country that there is a level of accountability, that the members in this honourable chamber are looking out for their interests, and that you will have a government that is responsive to the very needs of the people. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude my submission by reiterating the need for engagement at all levels in this country. Because whilst the Ministry of Finance will be very busy over the next few months trying to make sure that we can pay the bills for Barbados, that the consultations that shall ensue going forward will be critical to providing the confidence that is required for people and businesses and investors to continue to give Barbados the benefit of the doubt whilst we get through these challenging times. And to the extent that we are working to make sure that the confidence returns to this economy at a level that will allow growth, the commensurate level of growth to manifest itself, we are very cognizant that these are uncertain times. And in those uncertain times, it means that communication and consultation is important to giving people that most important need for being involved in terms of the solutions. And so therefore, whilst this government intends to lead the way forward, Mr. Speaker, we shall not do so in a vacuum. We will lead this country in the full glare of the light of the public. We should do so with strong consultation. We will try to build consensus where consensus needs to be built, but the public of Barbados can feel very confident that when decisions have to be made, that the decisions will be made in the interest of the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do not leave the chair. Sorry? Sorry.
Second reading.
Sorry. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Sorry.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker now do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is, go ahead. The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All those members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those members against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chairman. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry. Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. All those members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. All those honourable members not in favor, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor. Oh, sorry. Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule stand part. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
To the bill.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Sorry.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor, the Speaker, the passing of this bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor, the Speaker, the passing of one bill or four bills in committee. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. All those members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of the committee has reported the passing of one bill in the committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Passed and cited as the Barbados Revenue Authority Act. I'm sorry, Amendment Act, okay? 2018.
Question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those honourable members against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 3. This order is in the name of the Honourable Miss M.A. Mortley, but has been assigned to the Honourable R.R. Strawn. The order is to move the second reading of the National Social Responsibility Levy Repeal Bill 2018.
The honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, it is indeed an honor to stand to bring this bill to the Parliament of Barbados, which intends to repeal the National Social Responsibility Levy and make provision for related matters. Let me state from the outset, Mr. Speaker, that there was never anything social or responsible about the introduction of this act. And in the context of taxation, and I mentioned it in the previous debate, this represented the clearest sign of taxation without representation that we've ever seen in this country. Mr. Speaker, the background to the passage of this particular piece of legislation and this particular piece of tax policy was flawed from inception. It was introduced at a time when the government had intended to grab as much taxes as it possibly can, masquerading to the people of Barbados as if it would provide for some of the social services that they cited that the introduction of this particular levy was meant to alleviate. But, Mr. Speaker, the people of this country suffered tremendously under the introduction of this National Social Responsibility Levy Act. And certainly, we have listened to the people of Barbados. We have listened to the business interests in Barbados. And it is clear, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely clear that nobody in Barbados benefited from the introduction of this NSRL as it is known in the public. The cost of living, Mr. Speaker, let me remind you, and certainly through you, the public of Barbados, that cost of living was job number 1, job number 2, and job number 3 of the previous administration. And despite that mantra that they campaigned on and won the government, at every opportunity, Mr. Speaker, the previous administration sought to inflict hardship and increase the very cost of living on Barbadians. And this particular piece of legislation was the last dastardly deed, Mr. Speaker, that the previous administration would have inflicted on the people of Barbados. First, they introduced it at 2% in September of 2016, and they told the people of Barbados that the revenues that they would collect would go towards alleviating some of the issues at the QEH and a host of other things that they claimed that they were going to provide for the people of this country. And they used that context, Mr. Speaker, to levy this NSRL at 2%. The previous Minister of Finance even boasted that they collected more revenue than they thought they were going to collect at the 2%. But yet, as my colleagues will be able to attest, none of the monies that were collected under this particular levy found its way to any of the institutions or any of the programs that were cited as a reason for this being levied on the people of Barbados. None of those things were addressed, Mr. Speaker. But having introduced it in September 2016, in May of 2017, the previous Minister of Finance came to this very chamber and increased the levy from 2% to 10%, which then saw the largest increase in the cost of living in such a short space of time, Mr. Speaker, up until now, that we've ever seen in this country. And I say, Mr. Speaker, that this, again, is a commitment to the people of Barbados that when the Barbados Labour Party says it's going to do something, Mr. Speaker, that we act on it. And whilst the Honourable Prime Minister announced last week in the budgetary proposals, the financial statement and budgetary proposals, that this piece of legislation we intended to repeal, what we are doing here today, Mr. Speaker, is important because it is consistent that when you pronounce public policy, that you have to produce the appropriate legislation to match any pronouncement to public policy. And so whilst we would have campaigned the length and breadth of this country to repeal this, I hope that the people of Barbados now are taking note that what we do in this space is very important with respect to how people's lives are impacted on a daily basis. All of us in this honourable chamber, Mr. Speaker, we all know that there is a disconnect between what people perceive happens in their lives and what happens in this space. And today I am proud to stand here, Mr. Speaker, before you and the honourable members of this House to say to the people of Barbados that we will be removing the shackles from the people of Barbados that they have experienced over the last 2 years. 2 years with this dreaded National Social Responsibility Levy. Mr. Speaker, you will hear me through my various contributions speak to the order that must obtain within the execution of the public finances of this country. And whilst one does not ever want to tie one's hand behind your back, a government must provide a clear platform for growth. It must provide a clear and transparent platform so that people can plan their affairs. This National Social Responsibility Levy is representing nothing, Mr. Speaker, but an attempt by a government who only saw the people of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, as taxpayers. That's all the previous government, when they saw people, that was their perspective. And so they believe that whatever tax number that they can predict or justify or forecast, that the people had an obligation to pay those taxes, whilst that government never saw it fit to live up to its mandate of providing the level of public services that the people of this country expect. That's why I said, Mr. Speaker, and I want to repeat it, there's nothing social or responsible about this particular piece of legislation. And the Barbados Labour Party, having seen how people suffered under this particular piece of legislation, having listened to the cries of business people, to the cries of ordinary citizens in this country, that this thing had to go. Now, as an economist, I can tell you again that when you introduce taxation, that then leads to a situation where there's a slowdown in economic activity. It means it's counterintuitive. And so therefore, unless you have some offsetting mechanism that is going to generate growth, then when you introduce taxation, the nature of this kind of taxation, then you create problems in terms of the confidence in the economy, and you create problems with respect to the very said revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, Barbados is now at a critical juncture with respect to the management of our public finances. And whilst some may wish to indicate, as I've seen in some of the reporting post the budget statement of last week, there are some who may wish to suggest that we replace one set of taxes with another. But I would caution people to understand that the difference between the taxation, the tax policy that this government introduced last week, that the design of the tax policy was meant to make sure that the incidence, Mr. Speaker, the incidence of tax in this country occurs at the broadest level. And whilst you do not intend to in any way disadvantage any sector, what we have done is to methodically analyze the problem to determine where the incidence of tax ought to be borne such that it reflects the capacity, Mr. Speaker, of people to pay. Now, whilst we're in this process of certainly restructuring our debt, trying to reinvigorate our economy, we have ensured that where possible, that the burden is shared in an equitable fashion across the different segments of the community. But this National Social Responsibility Levy, Mr. Speaker, had a disproportionate impact on thousands of lower income people in Barbados. Because the reality is everybody has to eat, Mr. Speaker. Everybody has to eat. And at the end of the day, when you're faced with the supermarket bills because of this National Social Responsibility Levy, which is compounded at the end of the process for everything that is done in this country, then that, by its very essence, Mr. Speaker, increases the cost of living for thousands of Barbadians. And so when we remove this National Social Responsibility Levy, what Barbadians will see, and I want to make this clear, Mr. Speaker, that at the moment, businesses still have, as part of the inventories, stock that would have already attracted the National Social Responsibility Levy. And whilst this will take effect from July 1st, 2018, the public ought to be aware that you would not see an immediate reduction in price simply because of the existing stock in businesses. But however, we estimate that the average stock of inventory is somewhere between 2 months and 3 months on average. It depends on the sector that you're operating in, but on average it's between 2 to 3 months. And so therefore we anticipate, Mr. Speaker, that with the repeal of this NSRL, that over the course of the summer, that people in this country, as they move around to whether it's the supermarket or the gas station or wherever the case is, where they consume stuff, that they will start to see the reduction in prices because of the reduction of those inventories that businesses have in stock right now. And so we know what that will mean for persons certainly coming on to the end of August into September, as back to school, as we are all well aware, will start to take root. And so therefore, thousands of parents across Barbados will start to feel a slight ease simply because of the removal of this National Social Responsibility Levy. And certainly the government will work to make sure that the cost savings are passed on to consumers, because it is important now that as we seek to move the economy forward, that there's no room for perceived price gouging. The business community have given a commitment that they're in this together to rescue Barbados. And so therefore removing this National Social Responsibility Levy gives everybody an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to be able to do business again in this country in a manner that is conducive with the good welfare and social well-being that we know Barbados to represent. Mr. Speaker, I can't really express to you the joy that I have standing here to introduce this bill. And I'm sure that my colleagues will forgive me because this has been nothing but a nightmare for thousands of households across this country. And as we do this, we know that we are doing right by the people of Barbados, Mr. Speaker. And after 10 long years of sufferation, tax after tax after tax, with no commensurate improvement in the delivery of public services that people could justify why they were paying these taxes. Because make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, Barbadians are generally compliant with paying taxes. But there's an expectation, obviously, that when you pay your taxes, that you get something in return. And so therefore, as we seek to bring a level of order again back to the public finances, it is the responsibility of the entire government, Mr. Speaker, the entire government, to make sure that the provision of public services match the level of taxation and revenues that the government collects. Mr. Speaker, through you to the people of Barbados, the repeal of this bill represents not just a campaign promise, Mr. Speaker. It actually represents hope that your government will act in your interests, whether as an individual, whether as a business owner, whether as an investor. The government of Barbados will be taking decisions, and have already taken decisions, that are in the interests of all who live in Barbados. So, Mr. Speaker, there's more that I can say on this, but I suspect my colleagues may wish to also lend their voice to this debate. But let me assure the people of Barbados once again, and it is true, and again, sorry, before I sit, the Honourable Attorney General, again, I must commend his office and his staff, because, as I mentioned earlier, one can always pronounce policy, but you must do the work to bring the appropriate legislation to bring these matters to fruition. And certainly, again, the Attorney General and his office, they have responded to us in the Ministry of Finance with haste to make sure that the appropriate legislation has been brought and tabled in this House for consideration of the members of this Honourable Chamber, such that we can bring into effect, the end of this social irresponsibility levy. Mr. Speaker, yes, social irresponsibility. Antisocial, sorry. Mr. Speaker, this is no laughing matter. Whilst I am happy to stand here and argue for the repeal of this thing, this is really no laughing matter. A government simply cannot wreak havoc, on the citizens of its country. And we've all seen the results of when you attempt to do that. And so this government, this Barbados Labour Party government, under the leadership of the Honourable Prime Minister, certainly intends, as I have articulated earlier, to make sure that the tax policy is consistent with growth, the tax policy is consistent with our social obligations, and the tax policy is consistent with the good governance of this country. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your consideration, and I beg that the bill be read a second time. Thank you.
You also reserve the right to speak at a later time. Honourable Member for St. Philip South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm feeling blessed and indeed honored to be able to speak on behalf of the people of St. Philip South and the people of Barbados in agreement to the repeal of the National Social Responsibility Levy, what is before this House as the National Social Responsibility Levy Repeal Bill. Let me state at the outset that I do support my colleagues in the removal of this very draconian tax measure, and that I strongly believe that when this tax was imposed on Barbadians, it was done as what ought to have been called a national, antisocial, irresponsible levy. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, this levy came at a time when Barbadians were asked to pay an increase in VAT on goods and services. We may recall that the VAT rate was 15% and that it was increased to 17.5% with the caveat that it would have been reviewed in 18 months. And those 18 months never came, Mr. Speaker, sir. It came at a time after when Barbadians were forced to forego income tax benefits. You may recall there was the removal of a travel and entertainment allowance, which would have had a very negative impact on the incomes of people within that middle income group. The National Social Responsibility Levy also came at a time when our working class communities were asked to forego 50% of their first tax credit. And Mr. Speaker, were that not enough, it also came at a time when Barbadians were asked to endure an increase of an excess duty on gasoline and diesel, which took effect from July 1st, 2017. That excess duty moving from 25 cents per liter. Sorry, it was increased by 25 cents per liter, taking it to 99 cents from 74 cents. Diesel increase of 24 cents per liter, from 20 cents, taking it to 44 cents. So whilst you are being asked to pay more for energy, especially on energy costs that was directly linked to diesel, you will understand the impact that that would have had on the price of goods in the supermarket and the overall cost of living in Barbados. But Mr. Speaker, this National Social Responsibility Levy also came at a time when Barbadians were asked to pay a 2% forex levy on goods imported into this country, so that goods coming into Barbados were not only subject to the National Social Responsibility Levy, but people who using foreign exchange to pay for goods or even services outside of Barbados, because you were sending your children to university as well, would have been paying a 2%. forex levy. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, it should come as no surprise to any Barbadian that with a 400% increase in the National Social Responsibility Levy against a whole suite of taxes that I just mentioned would have crippled the Barbados economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, whilst I agree that Barbadians are very resilient and that Barbadians have bided the time until May 24th, I will equally agree that we canvassed this entire country on a manifesto promise that said we will remove this bad tax. And so today, Mr. Speaker, it is with that commitment that we have given to the Barbadian public that I stand here in support of this bill. Every Barbadian would have endured not only difficult economic times that were occasioned by the bad management of this economy, but every last Barbadian had to struggle to manage reduced disposable incomes. There were absolutely no salary increases between the period 2010 and 2018 to most public servants. You were at a time faced with increased unemployment and people having to go through the indignity of watching their utilities go under threat of disconnection. And whilst all this was happening, people across Barbados were forced to watch a government introduce a levy that further crippled their lifestyles and made it difficult for them to survive under conditions that were certainly not conducive to the lifestyles that they were accustomed to. And Mr. Speaker, right across Barbados, we had parents who were able to manage their disposable incomes prior to these draconian measures and were able to commit themselves to paying the mortgages and providing meals for their children, and that they were able to commit themselves even to taking a vacation. But that with the introduction of measures like these, you saw Barbadians reeling backwards, mortgages going into foreclosure. The common touch that people had where you could take a vacation to de-stress was lost. And so you find more people becoming depressed in a nation where we are known to be a people of pride in industry. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the gains from the introduction of such a levy, it is well documented and reported that there were none. But that in fact, the levy caused the economy to contract. And that whilst we had increased prices in Barbados, an increased cost of living, that you also had a social fallout in Barbados. Homes broken up simply because people no longer had that coping mechanism that went along with the comfortable lifestyles that they were accustomed to. And Mr. Speaker, if it is that we in the Barbados Labour Party have said to Barbadians, we are going to remove this bad tax, I stand today fully in support of what is before this honourable chamber in the name of all Barbadians. Now, Mr. Speaker, we did not only say we were going to repeal this tax, but we have also committed ourselves to giving Barbadians a promise that things will soon get better in Barbados once we all stay focused. And that when I consider what I said before, that dating back as far as 2008, when Barbadians were asked to bear the burden, and Barbadians within our labor force were asked to bear the burden of increased taxation, which started way back in 2008. And as if there was no mercy on Barbadians through every preceding year, through every following year, sorry, you had increase and increase and increase and increase of taxation upon Barbadians. Mr. Speaker, what is significant about today, and what is significant about this government's start of its term in office, is that we are not only removing this bad tax, but we have kept a promise that has said to you, your children will go back to the university without you having to pay tuition fees, and we are going to be able to do that. We have said to you that we are going to abolish road tax, and that you now will only be paying based on how much you drive. And that we have said to you that we are going to fix the sewage problems in Barbados. And that we have also committed to you that we are going to make sure that we protect Barbados' currency peg. And that we are going to increase our foreign exchange cover up to 15 weeks of cover, up to 15 weeks of imports. And Mr. Speaker, against doing all those things, it was not necessary for us to increase the overall burden of taxation on people. For what is the trade-off with the increase that was placed on fossil fuels? You no longer pay road taxes. So there is a trade-off. Unlike the National Social Responsibility levy that was imposed, where you paid that in addition to all other taxes. Mr. Speaker, what is the trade-off for Barbadians being asked to stay focused with us, being asked to commit with us, and being asked to work with us throughout these difficult times, is that our children are now able to return to the University of the West Indies this semester without having to pay tuition fees. And I say to all the naysayers that you may want to criticize, but what you cannot do is say to Barbadians that this Barbados Labour Party administration did not seek to keep its promise with you, where we said to you, we are going to remove those things that are making your lives difficult and help you to live a better life in Barbados. And as we remove this tax, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are happy to report that there will also be an increase in salaries in Barbados for our public servants. So that this is not a one-dimensional approach where people are only asked to bear the burden of taxation and to live on reduced disposable incomes simply because the government could not get its fiscal policies right. This is a situation where we are taking responsibility for our action and making sure that when we create our national social safety net, that we are including all Barbadians. And that when we do so, we are doing so with the purpose of empowerment of our people, as we have committed to in not only our manifesto, but that as we did in our covenant of hope. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to report to the people of St. Philip South that they will no longer have to pay a national social responsibility levy or what I term as a national antisocial irresponsible levy, because today we will make sure that this becomes a thing of the past. Mr. Speaker, I believe that there's great hope for better things to come in Barbados, and I believe that with the support that we are getting through the social partnership and through all right-thinking Barbadians, that we are going to be able to return Barbados to the days when people were able to live comfortably, were able to pay their bills on time, and were able to even save some money and still enjoy a comfortable life with their children and their families. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank those in the economics team, and I also want to thank our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, for being bold in making sure we create the ease that we promise all Barbadians. I'm obliged to you, sir.
The Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise happily to participate in this debate because it helps to improve our 100% record of fulfilling our promises to the Barbadian public. I can't do otherwise than look on in some amazement, because after my entry into politics some 8 years ago, I had the occasion to see our manifesto for 2013, which we never got a chance to put into practice, although we fought vigorously for the things that were in it. And I had the opportunity of seeing the other side's manifesto for 2013, which was full of promises, plenty promises, many promises. And I'm trying to think of one that actually came to fruition. Maybe somebody can fill that in later, because I can't pull it to mind at this point in time. Such that people in Barbados became disenchanted with politics, politicians, promises, and manifestos. So when we produced our manifesto, actually when the manifesto was first leaked, and people had to say, they thought that a lot of it was fanciful. They thought it was just election gimmicks. They thought this was another occasion of politicians spouting whatever it is that they needed to spout in order to get their seats and to get into government and then do nothing. So I was heartened that on the first business day of Parliament, the Honourable Prime Minister set about doing what she said she was going to do on the first business day. And unlike what happened with the last government, when the Minister of Finance would have made certain pronouncements that become law effectively from the time he speaks, but should be buttressed and followed up by subsequent legislation, that the legislative intent was missing. And quite often the things that were supposed to be done afterwards were not done after, and it had the government in a bit of a spot where some taxes it was collecting, they weren't necessarily collecting legally because the leeway time had expired. All of that to say this, Mr. Speaker, that I sit here and smile at every debate that has happened so far, because in chronological order, these debates have been the fulfillment of the Barbados Labour Party's covenant with the people of Barbados. And that is what a manifesto is supposed to be. A manifesto is supposed to be the party's solemn covenant with the people of the country that if we get in, we are going to do these things. So you can read our manifesto. This is what we pledge to do. And on the basis of these promises, we ask you to put us in and see these promises fulfilled. That is how people elect a government. I believe that what we're doing now is more than just passing legislation. We are now rebuilding the necessary and damaged trust and the fracture that has occurred between the government of Barbados and its people. We are showing there's some integrity in politics. There is integrity in the election process, and there is definitely integrity in the Barbados Labour Party's manifesto. Mr. Speaker, when the NSRL was first introduced at 2%, it was introduced with the stated objective of supplying some funds for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and also to purchase garbage trucks. There was no uncertainty there. It was said some of the money was going to be used to purchase garbage trucks. So Boyd was the Minister of Finance after the first 6 months, when I think he raised about $50 million through the NSRL, that he thought to himself, and the rest of his government fell in line, that, well, if we raise 50 million in 6 months on 2%, imagine what we could do if it was raised to 10%. Everyone, there was not one single person with an economics background that supported that move. Minister Carroll, as she now is, spoke out vehemently against it and said it was the wrong move. Minister Strawn, as he now is, spoke out against it, saying it was the wrong move. The head of the private sector spoke out against it. The head of the Chamber of Commerce spoke out against it. The lady, Ms. Dukaran, spoke out. Not one single person, not one single person, besides those who occupied the government side in this House, were in agreement with the 10% National Social Responsibility Levy. Indeed, far from just simply being in opposition to it, everyone who had anything to say predicted the contraction of the economy, predicted a slowdown in commerce in Barbados, predicted a retardation of progress, and lo and behold, all of these things came true. So the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, this is not a case where the government got an unexpected result. This is a case where a government advised itself and advised itself wrongly. And all the prophets of doom and gloom, as they labeled us, were proven to be right. But pride would not let them pull it back. So they continued to hurt the people of Barbados with what was essentially a bad tax. It was a bad tax at 2%. It was an even worse tax at 10%. And not one garbage truck. I just have to keep saying that. I mean, because it is true. Not one garbage truck. So after $50 million at 2% over 6 months, and the increase to 10%, I've been to the QEH. There's been no noticeable change in the QEH. The same shortages that existed still exist. The same equipment failures and equipment shortages that existed then still exist now. And not one garbage truck. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Honourable Prime Minister, in her former incarnation as the leader of the opposition, said that one of our firm promises to the people of Barbados is that we are going to repeal the National Social Responsibility Levy, I was heartened. And it came to pass. We kept getting the questions, where's the money going to come from? If the levy is gone, where is the money going to come from to do all of the other things that the Barbados Labour Party said it was going to do? Well, last Monday, that question was answered. Last Monday, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast stood up in this chamber and told the people of Barbados where the money is going to come from. And as opposed to it being a case of strangling our economy to make a point or greed taking over. We were met for the first time with a budget that was received on the ground with hope. A budget that was received on the ground with confidence. A budget that was received on the ground by the average man saying, I dare to believe this because it sounds right. I may not understand everything that is in it, but it is so comprehensive that I am prepared to take a chance on this. We got our mandate from the people with the overwhelming response on the 24th of May, 2018. And that overwhelming vote of confidence was translated into the reception of the budget by the Honourable Prime Minister. And in keeping with her promises, she said we were going to repeal this levy. So I am glad that we are here at this point in time to fulfill yet another promise that was made in our election campaign, yet another promise that was made in our manifesto, and to further the sound, progressive, well thought out, well reasoned, well researched, and well informed policies of this government as we seek to take Barbados forward. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of the members of the economics team, and in particular, Ministers Cadell, Strawn, and the Prime Minister, Dr. Clyde Maskell, who didn't just throw figures out there, didn't just throw what sounded good out to the people of Barbados for it to bite. Before coming into government, they worked as if they were in government, preparing the policies and plotting the framework destined to take Barbados forward. And for a lot of what occurred in the budget, I thank them for giving up their time then in the belief that the people of Barbados will do the right thing, and in the belief that we were on the right track and that we should sell ourselves to the people of Barbados. I want to thank the rest of my colleagues who also pulled their weight and lent their opinions and put the same economics team on the grill. Because it wasn't that the economics team spouted, these are the economic policies, and we all bought it. They were subjected to the most rigorous questioning, and they had to convince the rest of us who are not economists why these things should work. The policies that we saw come out in the budget were not as a result of pronouncements, but were as a result of reasoned consideration, influenced by all 30 members who now form this parliament, and also by their advisors. So this is really the people's budget. The repeal of the NSRL is not Mia Motley's idea. It is not Minister Cadell's idea. It is not Ryan Strawn's idea. The repeal of the NSRL is this government answering the call.
Please refer to honorary members and not by name, sir. Please, please.
I apologize profusely, Mr. Speaker. I won't go back over the names and attach the titles. Let's just...
Honorary member for Christchurch East Central, the honorary member for South Central, etc. That is the protocol.
For all of those who were involved, of course, I have now completely lost my train of thought. For all of those who were involved, this was not a BLP promise. This was not necessarily an economics team initiative. This was the government in waiting, as it then was, which forms the government of Barbados, now responding to the call of the average man on the street, responding to the call of the independent economists, responding to the call of those in business, responding to the call of those in commerce, and just doing the right thing. So I am not standing here now necessarily supporting the repeal of the NSRL. I am standing here supporting the next step of this government doing the right thing. This bill has my 100% support, Mr. Speaker, and I'm much obliged.
The honourable member for St. Michael South.
Good afternoon to the Honourable Chamber. Honourable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise this afternoon to speak to the repeal of the NSRL. And I do so, sir, cognizant of the fact that my first real job was as an officer in the value-added tax department. So I pay a lot of attention to taxes. I actually spent 6 years as a VAT officer. And I recall when VAT was introduced in 1997, and I was hired for the position in September 1996. We spent about 3 or 4 months in training so that we could understand the VAT, how VAT works, the impact on goods and services, the impact on business people, on consumers, and so on. So there was some effort placed into understanding the tax. And I would like to think that that is how taxes work and how tax systems work. That before a tax is introduced, there must be some effort placed in trying to understand the tax for the public, as well as for the people who are responsible for collecting the tax. And I remember one of the things that I liked most about the value-added tax was that it was a non-cascading tax, which meant that there was not tax on top of tax. You were able to claim back your input taxes and then pass on a proper price to the final consumer. And not every tax is going to be a non-cascading tax. But I remember also that there were some principles by which a good tax or any tax should be able to live up to. And the first was that a tax should be fair. The idea of fairness in a tax. And by fairness, I mean that, you wouldn't expect it to be a regressive tax, because some indirect taxes can be very regressive. If you have a situation where those who can least afford to pay find themselves paying the more or the most, then you know you're dealing with a regressive tax. And Barbadians at the time the NSRL was already introduced had paid so much money in taxes, and the bulk of that tax with the introduction of the NSRL would fall, the burden would fall almost squarely on the shoulders of the most vulnerable and the people who in this country did not have. We never felt it was a good tax. So I also remember that I was told that a tax should be adequate. So that if you want to get X amount of money, you create a tax that would produce X amount of money for you. And the reason I think that the NSRL was introduced at 2% and then quickly at 10% is because the government had no idea how much money they had to generate, because they had no idea what they were doing, in my opinion. And I think also when you consider that many Barbadians were left in the dark in relation to the terrible state of affairs in Barbados, that perhaps they could not come out and say, this is the amount of money that we need to collect as well. So it was both being incompetent, in my opinion, and deceptive. And so you saw the NSRL went from 2% to 10% in quick time, and still not enough money was collected on the tax. It was still not adequate. The third thing I recall as well is that a tax should be simple. The principle of simplicity in taxation is known. I mean, you don't want to create a tax that is a burden to understand. You shouldn't have to be struggling to understand your own tax assessment, how much money you're going to have to pay in taxes. I mean, that is a principle of taxation. A tax should be relatively simple, both in terms of the way it is assessed and in determining how much money you have to pay as a consequence of the tax. And we also know that a tax should be transparent. If you're going to ask people to pay taxes, they should know what is the amount of the tax and what it is that you're using the revenue that you're collecting for. There has to be a purpose. And we've heard that the taxes in relation to the NSRL the money was to be collected to do all kinds of things. And none of those things were done. And then lastly, we appreciate that there should be some administrative ease in the collection of a tax. And if ever there was a horrible tax, in terms of the collection of it, it had to be the NSRL. People had no idea how this tax was going to be collected. So in all of the areas of taxation, in every single regard, the NSRL has failed the indicators that one would expect to be associated with a good tax. In every single regard. And all of us who are in taxation, or people generally, would know that a tax should also give you some degree of certainty. I mean, within days, the NSRL people start pulling back. You don't do this, you have to take out this, you have to add this. BRA was asked to come up with terms and conditions for people to try to understand the NSRL. The former Prime Minister and the former representative for St. Michael South, former forever, I recall that he was saying days after the tax was introduced that he would be making adjustments, and the reason there was a delay between the announcement of the tax and the introduction of the tax was to allow for all kinds of adjustment, because he was prepared to make these. A tax should be certain. And so in every regard, the NSRL has failed the people. And one of the campaign promises that we made, and I'm very glad today that we kept it, was to repeal that tax because it was a bad tax. And a lot of people during the course of the budget have said, well, y'all brought taxes too. Of course we brought taxes. We said we were going to take back a bad tax, which was the nature of the NSRL. And if you live in a society, sir, you expect to pay taxes. It is for the general welfare of the society. And none of us don't expect to walk through a country and go through scot-free without paying a single tax. The average Barbadian understands that he or she must pay taxes. In fact, I recall very well that poor people are normally known for paying their taxes. In the history of the Value-Added Tax Office, when I was there, a lot of the people who were paying their taxes were the very small suppliers. And a lot of the incidents of, for whatever reason, people not paying taxes was for larger registrants. So we know that small people tend to pay their taxes. And a good tax shouldn't affect whether or not somebody buys or sells something. It should be neutral. But for every independent analysis, observation, conversation around the NSRL, we come to the same conclusion. The NSRL was a bad tax. And in many ways, sir, you would recall that the NSRL almost crept into being. You didn't even know it was coming. It just kind of happened. When the NSRL was moved from 2% to 10%, people did not even know there was a 2%. No time spent educating the public on the fact that there was an introduction of a tax. No time spent telling the people how this tax was going to be collected or for what it was going to be used. And then when the 10% came into being in much the same way, the same malignant way, this tax was applied to a lot of goods and services, and people didn't even know on what they were paying this NSRL. It's only very recently that I realized that I was paying NSRL on diesel and gas. And many people didn't know. And as a matter of fact, to show that it wasn't even an accident, that the government did not stumble on this wicked policy, the Minister of Finance had circulated something suggesting that the NSRL must never be shown as a separate item on an invoice, so that you have to hide it. And unlike the former government, we have taken a policy to show what people paying taxes on. So when we say we're asking people to pay $1.50 a day, and it is clear for Barbadians to see, it is because we want to be the absolute opposite of the last government. If people are being asked to pay a tax, they should know what they're being charged for. We want to be transparent, sir, and in many regards, the last administration was not transparent. I remember, sir, that the Minister of Finance...
The former
Minister of Finance. We have an outstanding Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, sir. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I remember that the former Minister of Finance, and the word I think the member for Christchurch East just used was he was buoyed. He got in here, sir, and he spoke about the $50 million that he raised. $50 million raised through the NSRL. But I also recall around that conversation that representatives of the private sector in this country were asking for more than anecdotal evidence. They said, where is the data associated with all of this? Tell us for sure where you're getting this money from. Show us where the money is coming from and what you're going to be doing with this money. But there was no data at all made available to the people of this country. So we had a situation almost where a tax was introduced as a burden on the backs of people, a tax that became an even heavier burden on the backs of poor people that were already being asked to pay a disproportionate share of taxes in this country. And at the end of the day, what we saw was almost complete mayhem. Business people don't know how or what or why or when or where to pay this tax. The agencies responsible for the collection of tax didn't know who or why or what or where. In fact, there was debate among different government agencies as to who is responsible for collecting the tax. The NSRL was a bad tax, and it was implemented badly, which just served to compound the situation and to make a bad situation worse. But Honourable Speaker, sir, I also remember the former member for St. Peter, and I remember the debate because I thought to myself what an interesting contribution was made. When the former member for St. Peter spoke, and a former Prime Minister, spoke on the NSRL and the taxes generally by the former government, the Democratic Labour Party government, it was his submission to this chamber that the policies of the Democratic Labour Party government would raise about $300 million in taxes, about $300 million in taxes, and that if they had entered into an IMF program, the burden on people in Barbados would not be as heavy, and at least we would have the benefit of the funds that you could get from the IMF. So they brought a policy or a set of policies that brought more burden on Barbadians than the IMF policies would have. And at the same time, did not give themselves the luxury of having the funds to be able to do things for people. And time after time after time after time, you see this is the approach of the former government. Why is my question? Why would you put in place the kind of policies and taxation that would so increase the burden on people and so increase the burden on poor people? I remember when the NSRL was introduced, that the minister, the former, where is the speaker? St. Michael Central, the former minister of social care. The speaker knows him well. Said here that to ease the burden on poor people, because I can talk about poor people every time I talk in here, to ease the burden on poor people, there was going to be an additional $2 million sent to the welfare department. Up to now, they never see that money. The welfare department never got the $2 million that was supposed to go to help poor people in this country. Well, the Honourable member, the Honourable Prime Minister has said that we will not give $2 million, but we will give $5 million additionally to the welfare department. And I am positive that they are going to get it, because every promise that we have made so far, we have kept. And that has been the mantra, the philosophy, and the approach of this Barbados Labour Party government. And so, sir, I am left with a whole set of questions. A whole set of questions. How after all of that, you could end up with 20-something downgrades? I mean, I know some of the answers. 20-something downgrades. People suffering more and more. I mean, during the campaign, I would ask the question, I mean, my mother had 8 children. And my mother would say to me when I do something naughty, or to the others, I mean, nobody can tell the other body to come back. Well, nobody can tell the rest of them to come back. Well, how many downgrades do you need to have before you realize that your policies ain't working? How many poor people must become poorer before you realize that your policies are not working? Why would you dig down deeper in failed policies unless you're just stubborn and arrogant and dismissive, sir? Why? And I also have to ask myself, sir, why would you then pretend to want to have a conversation about a raise of pay for public servants when you know full well you have no intention, notwithstanding the bounty of taxes that you collected? Because you would recall, sir, that last administration collected the most taxes of any administration in Barbados. How much? 95% of revenue. The Honourable Member for St. Michael's Central, South Central, keeping me on my toes. 95%. But you can't understand why, you can't see it. Sir, there was a pothole in London Road in my constituency that is so big it would swallow a transport board bus. Perhaps that's why the bus is gone. I am asking the Honourable Member from Christchurch West to attend to it. It is huge. I believe so. I haven't passed it last week, you know me. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I am concerned that we cannot see a single place where our tax dollars went. You go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the same thing. And I am very pleased again that in this budget we've put forward some money to not only expand the accident and emergency, but to deal with some of the other things that are necessary there as well. Sir, why at the end of the day do all these things without even the simplest explanation? I would love to know where the money went. I would love to know why it is that after all of these taxes, Barbadians are living harder than Barbadians have ever lived. I would love to know. I would love to know why it is that so many Barbadians are still living below the poverty line, notwithstanding the amount of taxes that were collected. In fact, I would love to know what's happened to the last poverty study. What was done with all the rich information that was made available in it? I had a conversation, sir, off the record with a member of an international agency, and he was speaking in relation to the former member for St. Michael Northwest, asking for another report. He said there have been so many reports, all you got to do is pick up one and dust it off. The international agencies have been saying the same thing forever. Local economists have been saying the same thing forever. It wasn't rocket science. But you could talk and talk and talk till the cows come home. If a man refuses to listen, a man refuses to listen. And so, sir, we have said during the course of our very short, but I must tell you, very productive time in government, that we came here to make the lives better for Barbadians. And every single policy that we have done so far reflects the things that we are saying. So in a nutshell, in my estimation, all of this comes down to leadership. All of it. Because you cannot have a situation where everything in a country, every sector in a country, everything is failing. Every single sector, pick one. All at the same time, pick one. So it cannot be the technical incompetencies of various people, where everybody in Barbados is incompetent. As a matter of fact, most people in Barbados are very competent. But we had an incompetent administration. And so, sir, the reality is that because of the deficit in leadership, we now have a deficit in a lot of things. And I am so pleased, I am so thrilled to be a member of the team led by the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East, the Honourable Prime Minister, who will restore this country. Because this country has to be restored. So at the end of the day, sir, what are we dealing with? There are very few Barbadians who are looking at our mini budget and saying that it is unfair. Very few. In fact, I haven't heard a lot of people say so at all. Because people realize if they have a relationship with their leadership, that they are prepared to trust the leadership. The Honourable Member for Christchurch East just said that it was the people's budget. In many ways, we are the people's government, because a lot of what we are saying is what the people have asked of us. And sir, I do not know if you feel it, because it's not a tangible thing. But when you walk down the streets of Barbados since May 24th, on the morning of May 25th, and every day since, Barbados has felt like a different country. There is a greater degree of hope in the people. People now feel that their expectations are going to be met, and if they're not met, they know that the government of the day that they have is working tirelessly to advance their interests. And sir, I have heard people say to me time and time again, Mr. Humphrey, we will support you. We will support the Prime Minister. We will support the economic team, because they know that we are supporting them. And if anything must continue by this administration, and I do not honestly see how it could be otherwise, because I do not think the Honourable Prime Minister knows different, it has to be that we continuously maintain a relationship with the people, so that when something occurs, we keep the people informed. I've been picking on the member for Christchurch East, but they just watched his press conference too. And whenever something is happening, we are having a conversation with the people, because we did not get elected on our own. We didn't pick ourselves. If it could have, it would have picked all 30 of us, but it couldn't, and the people did. So thank the people of Barbados. And sir, here we are. And it would seem like we've been doing this for a long time, but we've just started. We've only just begun. The romance is not over. We got a lot of love to give. And if the people continue to hold strain, and if the people continue to show faith, and if we continue to honor the faith that the people have placed in us, then I am confident, sir, that we will be able to rise above the circumstances that currently affect this country. Because we will not let these circumstances dictate the way we approach these circumstances. We will not let them dictate how we think about the world. The Honourable Member who sits beside me for St. Michael's South Central is always speaking about what we promised in our manifesto on a new national consciousness, a new way of thinking about ourselves. She reminded me again in Cabinet last week. A new way of thinking about the world, a new way of thinking about ourselves. Who are we? And why are we here? And perhaps we'll have a further conversation when we discuss integrity. But as a country, we have to ask ourselves, who are we and why are we here? And what is it that we are prepared to give up? Because there's some things we have to give up. We're not going to get out of this mess just so. But we can promise the people that every cent that we collect will be accounted for. Yeah. We will promise the people that every cent that we spent will be in their interest. And at the end of the day, Barbadians will be able to say and to feel proud again that they are Barbadians and that they have a government that is representing their interests.
Your Honourable has 5 minutes remaining.
Sir, I don't need 5 more minutes, sir. So as I close, I just want to remind Barbadians of how grateful we are for this opportunity. I want to remind Barbadians that we've only been here for short of 4 weeks. We haven't even been here for a month. I want to remind Barbadians that the conversations that we have started, we will keep, because that is the character of this Barbados Labour Party administration. I want to remind Barbadians that the position we now find ourselves in was not placed on them by this Barbados Labour Party government, but that it was placed on them by a reckless Democratic Labour Party administration. And I want to remind Barbadians that day after day, week after week, we will come to this place and other places and in our constituencies with our primary interest and concern being their well-being. And one of the things we felt that we had to do to continue to elevate their interests and to promote their well-being was to remove this very bad national social responsibility levy. And so we said we would do it, and we have done it. Promise made, promise kept. With that, I am obliged, sir. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I too stand in this chamber this afternoon to support the repeal of the National Social Responsibility Levy Act. I started to do so, Mr. Speaker, growing up in a small shop in Rose Hill, St. Peter, and having an understanding of taxation, but more importantly, how taxation affects the ordinary people of St. Peter and of Barbados. The NSRL, as my colleagues would have indicated earlier, we've always been clear that this tax, the way it was constructed, the way it was implemented, made it a bad tax for Barbadians. It was a bad tax because not only was it kind of hidden in the pricing, but it had the effect of this cascading effect, where you have a tax and then you have VAT on top of a tax. And so the NSRL became inflationary for Barbadians. And the challenge with a tax like this, and the way it is structured and the way it is implemented, is that inflation tends to impact those at the lower levels of our society in a greater way than those who are better off. And this tax said to me that the implementers of it, and I'm not talking about the public servants, I'm talking about the policymakers who brought this to the Honourable House, they either were not aware of how it would impact ordinary people, or they did not care how it would impact ordinary people in Barbados. And so, as the Honourable Member who just sat has been saying all day, for us, we made a promise. I just don't want to repeat him word for word, but we made a promise, and we have kept our promise. Even without having integrity legislation, we are demonstrating our integrity. We made a promise to the people of Barbados, and we are keeping that promise. And not a promise for sake of a promise, but a promise made because we understood, we saw, we recognized how the people were being impacted by this tax. This tax, which increased inflation in an almost exponential way, was placed on the backs of ordinary people who had not benefited for many years from any pay increases. This inflationary tax was placed on the backs of public servants right across the spectrum who had not had a pay increase for 8 years. This tax almost seemed designed to make people poor. Now, we were told that the funds collected by this NSRL, and on the campaign trail, I reflected almost every night I spoke, that when I first heard the term used, it was such a nice sounding term, National Social Responsibility Levy. I almost felt that I should feel happy to pay this tax. And I think that is why the term, why the name was used. But we were told that part of the social responsibility, part of the social service to be impacted, to be helped by this tax, was our health care. The QEH was supposed to benefit. Garbage collection, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East indicated, we were supposed to have better garbage collection because there were going to be purchases of garbage trucks. And so there is a tax implemented in Barbados. We are told that we should expect improved services in our healthcare system. We are advised that we are going to have improved service as it relates to garbage collection. But as Barbadians pay this tax, as funds are collected, even more than the former Minister of Finance expected to collect, still there is no improvement in healthcare at the QEH. Still, there is no improvement in the garbage collection in this country. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, rather than improvements in the provision of social services, we find declines even in the face of improved collection, increased collection, or collection of larger amounts of tax than was initially envisaged. And so the question that Barbadians have asked is, what has happened to the money that was collected? Barbadians who were reeling under the imposition of about over 20 taxes before this one, they were legitimately asking, what is happening to the money? Because Barbadians, Mr. Speaker, are willing to pay their fair share of taxes if they can see the benefits to them and their society of the taxes that they are paying, the taxes that the authorities are collecting. When people pay taxes, they have a legitimate expectation. Tax revenue is used by government in the provision of social services, in keeping the peace. But rather than explaining to the people of Barbados what is happening or what the taxes are being used for, rather than demonstrating where the tax dollars are being spent, the people of Barbados were insulted. And the now former member for St. Michael's South said to Barbadians, myself, the people of St. Peter included, that we are sucking on the nipples of the government. Well, I had to do that as an infant. I just want to remind the Honourable Member for St. George South that I was not born big. And so I also have to let him know that I have 2 children, and I also observed that phenomenon. But the people of Barbados were told that we are sucking on the nipples of government. That former Honourable Member for St. Michael's South never explained, and I suspect it is because he never understood, that the milk in the nipples is provided by the people of Barbados. The Barbados Labour Party, this Barbados Labour Party government, understands that all the funds that we use as a result of tax collection are tax that are taken from the people of Barbados, that we are accountable for, and that are to be used in the service of the people of Barbados. And that is what this Barbados Labour Party will do with the tax revenue collected by this government. We separate ourselves quite clearly from the last government because they seem to have been engaged in a process of taxing for the sake of taxing. I am forced to say that, Mr. Speaker, because if I am not able to see where the money is going, then I have to assume one or two things. It is either going into the pothole on London Road, or it is going someplace where it really shouldn't be. But I heard somebody say pockets, I'm not sure. Do you mean pockets of people's pockets?
I remember that's probably an aside.
Yeah,
that was not meant for
maybe it's an
ears.
aside. But the people of Barbados have asked the question, and they continue to ask the question. And I want to make it clear through you, Mr. Speaker, to the people of Barbados, that this Labour Party government, this Barbados Labour Party government, will continue to be accountable to the people for the tax revenues that we collect. I said in the debate on the budgetary proposals last week that this government, even though we sat and continue to sit with the social partners, even though we recognize the good faith on the part of the business sector in Barbados, we recognize as a government that we have been elected by the broad masses of the people of Barbados. And I want again to recommit to the people of Barbados that we as a government will be monitoring the situation so that we ensure that as the business cycles that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central spoke about, as those business and purchasing and replenishment cycles take place, we will be monitoring to make sure that the savings that are to accrue to the people of Barbados, the consumers, actually reaches the consumers. And the reason I say that is because the budgetary proposals that we debated last week are intended to allow the burden of restoration and rescue to be borne across different sectors. We have indicated that the people of Barbados, the ordinary workers and consumers, are not, as was the policy of the last government, to be the only bearers of the burden. This repeal of the National Social Responsibility Levy is part of our commitment to ensure that the ordinary people of Barbados are not left to bear the burden of restructuring and adjustment alone. And when I say that we will be monitoring businesses, it is so that all Barbadians are able to understand and are able to recognize that while workers are bearing some of the burden, while consumers are bearing some of the burden, the businesses in Barbados will also have to bear their fair share of the burden. And we have pledged to ensure that that is what happens in this country. This government operates based on fairness, based on equity. This government takes a position that all of its policies must be anchored in social justice, so that every segment of the society will bear load when there's load to be borne. Every segment of society will reap rewards when there are rewards to be reaped. The Barbados Labour Party, as it constructs tax policy, is a party in the economic team, the member for St. Mike for Christchurch East Central, and the others, Ambassador Maskell and the others, are aware and have indicated to us, and we have discussed, that any tax policy will be policy that is anchored in that concept of social justice. And so I want to say in this brief interjection in this debate, through you to the people of Barbados, that this repeal, the repeal of the National Social Responsibility Levy, is but one indication and one manifestation of the policy of this great party, a party that was founded in the struggle to bring poor people out of poverty and out of oppression. Correct. This party understands what it is to fight on behalf of poor people. This party has not lost its soul. This party is still a party that fights hard on behalf of the people. And so as we repeal this iniquitous tax, a tax that was placed, you know, it is, Mr. Speaker, I am still amazed. I don't know if I'm gonna die fascinated by the name. I'm still amazed that such a terrible imposition could have such a nice name. I think it is a really, it is a very bad thing for the English language that it was misused in this way. But those who misused it were not very au fait with the English language either. But I want to say to Barbadians that this Barbados Labour Party will continue to fight the battles on behalf of the people of Barbados, the poor, the working, the ordinary consumers. And we will ensure that in all things we do, everything that we do will be anchored in that concept of social justice. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to enter this debate, Mr. Speaker, that seeks to repeal this National Social Responsibility Levy Act. And I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support comments I heard coming from the member for Christchurch East Central and comments from the member who just took his seat, the member for St. Peter. And I rise, Mr. Speaker, based on the responsibility that I've been charged with as Minister of Commerce. And in his wrap-up, the honourable member, the member for St. Peter, Mr. Speaker, he spoke about the need to safeguard against unscrupulous business practices, even though he did not use that word. And while we recognize that this tax, Mr. Speaker, was indeed a bad tax. Say was because that's past tense. And the honourable member for Christchurch East, who spoke about the comments being echoed in the upper chamber. But I wish to state categorically, Mr. Speaker, that more comments were echoed in this chamber as it relates to this tax, and indeed this tax being a bad tax and a tax that has disadvantaged many Barbadians and many businesses. And I would get into that briefly, Mr. Speaker. I know time is of the essence and most members would have dealt with most of the relevant issues as it relates to this tax. But I still see the need, Mr. Speaker, to rise and share a few comments as the Minister of Commerce. And the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, the former member for St. Michael Northwest, when he introduced this tax, he spent, and he's an entertainer, Mr. Speaker. If you monitor debates in this Lord Chamber, you would know that when the honourable member for St. Michael Northwest, when he spoke and he introduced a bill, he's a good seller. But he sells with an empty tray, because at the end of the day, he spills forth nothing else but empty promises, and there's nothing in the tray which would benefit Barbadians and businesses in this country. But nonetheless, he has a lot of fancy words, and indeed he spent a lot of time speaking about this National Social Responsibility Levy. And it was first introduced, Mr. Speaker, I think it was in 2016 when the 2% was introduced, the 2%, the National Social Responsibility Levy. It came into effect September the 1st, 2016. And that levy was supposed to do many things in this Lord Chamber, including assist with paying the bills at the hospital, if I can recall, and assist with the purchase of trucks, which the honourable member for St. Michael East now is trying to resolve, and the member for the city is trying to resolve at the hospital. And all it did, Mr. Speaker, was to generate taxes in this country without solving any of the economic problems that we were faced with. And it moved from 2% to 10% July 1st, 2017, Mr. Speaker. And yet again, he promised that this increase in levy from 2 to 10% will generate increased revenue of $291 million for a full financial year, and 2018 at the time, from July to the end of the financial year, it would generate $218 million for the remaining 9 months of that fiscal year. And, Mr. Speaker, you have to ask yourself who benefited from this tax. From the 2% and then the 10%, Mr. Speaker. And if you recognize we were no better off as a nation as a result of the Democratic Labour Party imposition of this National Social Responsibility Levy. So I join with my colleagues and who have recognized that this tax indeed is a bad tax, but having listed it as a bad tax, we recognize that it was part of a Democratic Labour Party's taxation strategy to take them out of the economic woes that they put themselves in the first place. But the Barbados Labour Party came up with a tax relief strategy for all Bajans. And we started this strategy, if we take our minds back to 2013 and 2014. When we repealed, we fought as a team, and I want to congratulate the Prime Minister of this country. When we fought to repeal the municipal solid waste tax imposed in 2014. And that tax, Mr. Speaker, also was a bad tax. And we fought to repeal that. So our strategy, Mr. Speaker, and we came through. We heard today again, Mr. Speaker, repealing the need for tax clearance certificates in this country. That is yet part of our strategy to relieve Bajans of these use taxes. And we came again, Mr. Speaker. We abolished the road tax, and we are replacing it with a more equitable tax on petroleum products. So if you follow the sequence, Mr. Speaker, if you follow the sequence of events as it relates to the Barbados Labour Party's strategy, two things. They were aimed at relieving the stress that has been imposed by the Democratic Labour Party on the citizens of this country. And citizens, businesses, households, you name it, would have suffered from the Democratic Labour Party's broad taxation strategy. But having said that, the second thing, Mr. Speaker, we as a party, we have seen the need in this country for all sectors to share the load and carry the burden. We don't believe that based on the shape of the pyramid, because most of the weight and the size is at the bottom, that we should allow the poor people. And I heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, he said in this Lord Chamber he will continue to champion the cause for poor people. I guess he has a friend in the member for St. Michael East and also the member for St. George South. And for the city as well. St. Michael East is seen in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, as the God of poor people, champion the cause for poor people.
God of St. Michael Central, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, and it brings us to the point that each and every single one of us in this Lord Chamber, Mr. Speaker, we recognize the need to allow people to eat and sleep comfortably, to access certain services in this country without being heavily burdened and without having to rely on the state, such as the welfare. And this is part of our strategy, Mr. Speaker, our tax release strategy to ensure that the citizens of this country indeed can live a respectable life and access what Maslow called the basic needs in life: water, food, and shelter. And I want to congratulate the members on this side and indeed the work that has been done, not only with these budgetary proposals, but as a party on the whole. And I think someone mentioned it from the days of Sir Grantley Adams, how we were seen as the people, the right excellent, sorry, that's the right title. Thank you. The member for St. Thomas would indeed correct me. The right excellent Sir Grantley Adams and the Barbados Labour Party, who have indeed saw the need to improve the quality of life for people in this country. And we have not changed the mission and the strategy of the Barbados Labour Party since the 1930s. And we have been consistent, unlike the Democratic Labour Party. This great institution of 80+ years has been consistent with its strategy as it relates to empowering people in this country of all class, of all color. We believe in equity, and we believe in empowering our citizens and giving them opportunity and motivating people with our strategies. And indeed, the removal of the National Social Responsibility Levy, we saw as a result of the heavy taxation by the Democratic Labour Party, the member for Christchurch East would put it probably the best way. We saw a contraction in this economy, whereby businesses had to send home people in the private sector I'm speaking about. I'm not talking about the Democratic Labour Party's hatchet job that was done on the public service. I am speaking about the taxation strategy by the Democratic Labour Party that saw businesses being closed, that saw people being dismissed, laid off in the private sector. And then we come to the civil service, whereby they saw the cutting of the civil servants, sending home of what they called 3,000, but it was more than 3,000 workers. The lowest level workers. And I remember the member for St. Thomas and I and others getting up in this house, this Lord Chamber, sorry, Mr. Speaker, and leading the charge as it relates to beautify Barbados workers who were given notice the day before they were sent home in this country. And that is what the Democratic Labour Party put the people of this country through, just to raise something called revenue, and not a clear strategy as how to bring this country out of the economic decline that it suffered for 10 years. And Mr. Speaker, we as a party, and I will wrap up shortly, Mr. Speaker, because I'm pleased with all the contributions from the other members this afternoon. We as a party, Mr. Speaker, recognize that taxation alone cannot return growth to this country. And we recognize that early, before the election was called, or before the 2018, we recognized that years ago. And I mentioned the whole municipal solid waste tax repeal, where we fought and marched, and the citizens of this country stood up for what they thought was right at the time, and still what is right now. We got cursed. In this Lord Chamber, we were called many names by the member for Christchurch South. Thank you, the present member for Christchurch South. I thank you for relieving us of that man who has no respect for anyone at all. We were called several things, and I thank the honourable member for St. Michael for Christchurch East also for relieving us of that man who has no respect for women in this country. And I thank the honourable member, I would say mostly, for St. Michael Northwest for relieving us of the man who did the damage. And indeed, my friend and colleague for St. Michael South for relieving us of the man who cannot lead, and who, as you rightfully put it this afternoon, leadership matters. Indeed, the blind led the blind for the last 10 years in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, we are at a stage where our people feel relieved, they feel energized, they're rejuvenated, and I'm speaking about the ordinary citizens, the businessman, people from all walks in this society. They feel energized, they feel relieved, as a result of the Barbados Labour Party's policies that will indeed see growth and some respectability return. Discipline as well, prudence, good governance, ethical governance practices. And we know sometime soon in the near future, the member for St. Michael Southeast will inform us when the integrity legislation bill will be debated. And she's saying next week, thank you, member for St. Michael Southeast. And this party, we have no difficulty declaring our assets. Because we believe, other than relieving this country of the heavy burden of taxation, we believe that ethical and honest leadership matters. In that way, we can motivate most of the sectors. Check the work that has been done over the past 3 weeks with the social partnership by this administration led by the Prime Minister. And Mr. Speaker, the journey has just begun. And we know that our people will indeed walk the journey with us every step of the way as we seek to rebuild and restore confidence in this country at all levels. And Mr. Speaker, while I wrap up, I want to say to the members and to the country as a whole that the Ministry of Commerce is charged with the responsibility as we remove the National Social Responsibility Levy. The Ministry of Entrepreneurship, Small Business and Commerce, we are charged with the responsibility, and I said it in my preamble, of ensuring that good business practices prevail as we remove this National Social Responsibility, this bad tax. So we have our trading standards inspectors, officers, what do you want to call them? The correct name is trading standards inspectors, who have been out there diligently monitoring the prices in the supermarket, at other retailers, distributors, to ensure, as the member for St. Peter said in his wrap-up, that good business practices prevail in this country, and that our citizens, whether poor, rich, or whatever class or color, benefit from the removal of this National Social Responsibility, and that fair practices, fair business practices becomes the way. I'm not saying that that is not happening now, but that we don't see any price gouging, and we don't want to see our stakeholders trying to hold on to these prices that would have seen the 10% National Social Responsibility being part of the pricing regime. It is no longer there, effective in a few hours. And we will be monitoring how businesses adjust their prices, because the citizens of this country must benefit from the removal of the National Social Responsibility Levy. Not only businesses, but the average man in the street, the households. People need the ease to send school the children and put food on the tables. And that is one of the reasons why we have removed this National Social Responsibility Levy, to ease the plight of the poor people in this country, to ensure that businesses have what we call elbow room to move forward. And this is indeed significant to growth, returning growth to this economy. While we have instituted measures, and these measures have been shared by all sectors, we too have recognized that businesses need an ease to move forward. So we have let down the handbrake so the car can move, and there's gas in the car. But we don't want you to drive recklessly. We want you to consider every single citizen in this country as this National Social Responsibility Levy and this bad tax is removed. So, Mr. Speaker, as I close, I've sent a clear message, not threatening anyone, but to let people know that the Ministry of Commerce will continue to watch the business practices in this country so that both the supermarkets and the citizens of this country can benefit from the ease in this National Social Responsibility Levy. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Mr. Speaker, I would want to just make a few brief remarks. I'm very proud of my colleague from St. George South, who has spoken very brilliantly indeed. And when we speak on behalf of the center of the island, a place that really understands what it is to be poor, what it is to be humble, but above all, we understand what it is to be good citizens of this country. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that he rightly pointed out that the NSRL, which to my mind was a bad consumption tax, a tax that really hit on the poor. The poorest of the poor felt it, because any tax on consumption is really a tax that poor people will feel, because they have to eat, drink, they have to move about. It was a tax on everything that was imported in this country, tax on clothing, drink, health items. And really the poorest of the poor felt it. At the time we thought, and like the member for St. Peter felt that the name was a fair-sounding name, but I want to remind him that things that come in fair-sounding sometimes not necessarily the best. The songs sometimes they smell well, but it's already a bad thing. And this was, to my mind, a very bad tax that moved from 2% to 10% from 2016 onwards. And the Labour Party fought while in opposition that this tax was going to be felt across the sectors, especially the poor. Pensioners who had no increase for years felt it mostly. And I believe that in my constituency, St. George North, at the canvas, the older people especially were saying we have to do something about it. But even though the elderly and the poorest felt it, I believe that there were some persons within the Democratic Labour Party who issued a sounding to their party as well. Because I was at cricket last weekend at the Empire Sports Club. I'm sure you're aware of the Empire Sports Club. And a well-known Democratic Labour Party strong supporter from St. Michael Northwest, a fellow called Walcott, who told me I did not go to vote, you know. I did not go to vote. And I believe many of the Democratic Labour Party supporters stood home because of this iniquitous tax. I believe a lot of them believe that this was the tax that really broke the camel's back, and they could not get through to their party. And I want to thank all those Democratic Labour Party supporters who did not go to vote this election. And I want to thank all those persons who came out and vote for the Barbados Labour Party. And I believe that all Barbadians should really pat themselves on the back for having removed the Democratic Labour Party and remove a number of these impositions that really kept the country down. And people should now begin to live better. People should now begin to strive better. We should see a more brisk in people's step, Mr. Speaker. I believe that this beginning, and as I said already this morning, will usher in a new nest for the people of Barbados. And people, Mr. Speaker, no doubt will understand that the Barbados Labour Party has always been at the forefront of looking after and putting the people first. In fact, that is our manifesto's pledge. It has always been the motto of the Barbados Labour Party, to put people first. And I believe that when we see these benefits, and of course, you know, when one talk about the road tax, sometimes people say, well, look, you are imposing tax on fuel. But let's look at what we have done over the past couple of weeks. We now removed the NSRL, and the member for St. George North, St. George South really pointed out, we were responsible for the removal of the municipal tax as well, even though we're in opposition, because we fought for it. And the people of Barbados went with us. So that these taxes will help, the removal of these taxes will help Barbadians, especially the poorest of the poor. And I want to salute the government for doing the right thing at the right time, even though we know that the summer is approaching us and, you know, it's going to take 2 months, I understand 2 to 3 months to see some relief of the taxes. I believe Barbadians should still monitor, even though the Ministry of Commerce have pledged to monitor the prices in the supermarkets, the shops, and in the drug stores, because we noticed that some prices of drugs have moved from more than 400%, especially drugs that affect persons that really need the most in the cancer treatment, hypertension, and so on. Those drugs that were not on the formulary became very, very expensive. And a number of doctors I know were very concerned about the high prices that as it relates to the imposition of this NSRL. So we will continue to monitor, and I want the people of Barbados to monitor prices as well. It will not come down immediately over the next month or so, but we are hoping that the prices of drugs especially will show a decrease. I hope the price of vehicles, because I know that there's some persons in the vehicle business have moved their prices in the last year up quite considerably, especially even those vehicles that are below the 100 to 1500 cc's. And we're hoping that these prices will show a decrease over the next 2 months or so. But Barbadians should monitor. Barbadians should monitor these prices, because we are in this together. We are in this together, and I hope that Barbadians will use the hotline that the government has introduced to let us know what is happening, to keep abreast of the prices, and of course, to let the government know these are things that we are doing. And we would continue, Mr. Speaker, to follow what is happening to the price system within Barbados, because we know that there are people who sometimes will say we are going to have a few specials on certain products, but then you have a reduction in certain prices, but then they hit you with substantial increases in other items. And we will continue to monitor, and the Barbadians should monitor this, because already I have been hearing that we will do this, but prices will not come down. I have heard that. And I want to give my constituency the assurance that we will monitor. And I want to give, I believe, Barbadians the assurance that this government stands ready to defend them whenever the occasion arises. If we believe that merchants, retailers, wholesalers, those persons that buy online, those persons that purchase the items in advance, because we know that there are a number of persons would have purchased items in advance, and there are a number of persons who are waiting already. I have heard people saying to me that they are waiting until July 1st to start not to pay their road taxes. So we have people who are waiting. Some guy said to me that he is going to put down his car until the 1st of December, 1st of July, because his road tax is due all in now. So he's not going to he's not going to drive until the 1st of July. And some people are asking, if I paid my road tax taxes in January, would I get a refund? Would the Ministry of Finance give me? And these are legitimate questions that people ask from time to time. If I pay my tax a month ahead, in the month of June, would I get a rebate by the beginning of July? What would the Ministry of Finance do? I do not have the answer, and I hope that within time, the Ministry of Finance, the BRA could tell us how these people will get their refinancing done. But the key question and the answer is this, that the Barbados Labour Party government has repealed these taxes that have been a burden, and will continue to monitor the prices. We want to ensure that we bring back normalcy to business practices in this country, and to ensure that people benefit when it matters. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In very much the opinion of the majority of people in St. Michael West, of whom I've heard on this NSRL, it is a tax which was oppressive, and certainly one with which they would not be unhappy to part company. Mr. Speaker, in my humble view, the NSRL represented or represents the worst of government. Ostensibly, the interests of the people were put on the front burner because we heard that the tax would enable government to perform some of its social service functions, especially with respect to health and sanitation. Not only were the people's interests not put on the front burner, they didn't make it to the stove at all. So that was purely posturing. And so in my view, as I suggested, it represents or represented the worst of government. But Mr. Speaker, it also represents, in my view, the tyranny of numbers. Had the government of the day listened to the cacophony of voices from the outside that express a disfavorable opinion of this measure and that it stays for having to pay it, perhaps they would have been otherwise guided. Even if they had taken into account the minority opinion on the inside of this honourable chamber, they may have been better advised than to have persisted with this measure. And there you have the danger of the tyranny of numbers. If you look at the context in which the measure was introduced, you see how ill-advised it was, because the economy and the people of Barbados were already under stress and under pressure with respect to other pieces of taxation and the rising cost of living. Even if you consider how it was implemented, and I bear very much in mind the contribution today of the Honourable Member St. Michael South, which I thought was very instructive and telling and very informative to those perhaps who might not have been better informed on this measure. But the manner of its implementation was also untimely and poor, and the quantum of the tax measure was also oppressive. And it gave expression to the tyranny of numbers. Like I said, the NSRL, in my view, reflects the unwisdom of government. It reflects the uncaring of government. It reflects the unyielding of government. And I pray that this administration, nor any other which should follow it in years to come, should ever bring itself to that sorry state of mind and the country to this sorry pass. With that, I want to register my agreement with the measure.
Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I believe there's consensus in the chamber for the complete removal of this National Social Responsibility Levy from the lives of Barbadians. And so the Ministry of Finance is certainly pleased to be able to move this repeal bill, which, again, will make not just people happy, but certainly usher in a new level of confidence as far as the management of the public affairs and the public finances of this country. Now, before I wrap up this debate, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted, for the record, to state what were those lofty objectives that the previous administration sought to justify the introduction of this levy. And so through you, Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind the people of Barbados exactly what they said in 2016. Number one was to assist in the offsetting the costs associated with financing public health care service provision. 2, service a loan to provide the Sanitation Service Authority with a fleet of new trucks and to procure parts for the existing fleet. Fleet, yes, fleet, it says fleet. 3, fund a national cleanup and debushing program, Mr. Speaker. So healthcare, fleet for the sanitation, as well as parts, and a national cleanup and debushing program. Of course, Barbadians are well aware today that none of these initiatives were addressed, even though the former Minister of Finance boasted in this House that they collected more revenue from the measure than they had anticipated. And so by rights, Barbadians, certainly the anger that they now feel is completely justified because they were misled, Mr. Speaker. Because just 1 week ago, the Honourable Prime Minister and member for St. Michael North East introduced measures specifically in the budget that will deal specifically with each and every measure that was outlined as the justification for the introduction of this levy, which the people of Barbados will now know for sure will happen. And so the introduction of the health service contribution, which will be managed by the National Insurance, very shortly, Mr. Speaker, just as we've done here, the act which governs that specific contribution will be brought here to make sure that the monies that are collected from that health service contribution starting in October will actually be ring-fenced and sent directly to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have come here to make sure that, as I keep saying, Mr. Speaker, that we can address the delivery of public services in this country in a way that is befitting to Barbadians. And so, in short order, that specific piece of legislation to do that, Mr. Speaker, will be brought to this Honourable House. Mr. Speaker, effective July 1st, 2018, as we know, households will be asked to pay $1.50 per day to help offset the cost of garbage collection as well as sewage, as a sewage contribution through the garbage and sewage contribution, which will be introduced for households, and commercial entities across this country will be expected to pay 50% of their water bill, which actually represents a reduction for some of those who are already connected to the sewage system, since they currently pay 2/3. But since it is a national imperative that we get this sewage issue under corrective measure, that we have sensitized people that this burden now cannot only be borne by those who are physically connected to the sewage systems, but because it is a national imperative, it must be shared and maintained for the good of Barbados. So, Mr. Speaker, on all two accounts, this Barbados Labour Party government have had to introduce specific measures to deal with these very things that were cited as the reason for the National Social Responsibility Levy. Now, there are those who are here suggesting somehow or the other that people's water bills are going to go up. I just want to remind the public through you, Mr. Speaker, all the government of Barbados is doing with respect to the Water Authority is to use the existing billing system, which goes to every household, every business in this country, using their billing system in order to be able to collect the GSC such that it is easier for government to collect the money. So people's water bills will not go up, Mr. Speaker. People's water bills will not go up. All the government is seeking to do is to use the mechanism of collection that already exists to be able to collect the taxes. And so for those who want to spread mischief, to suggest that people's water bills will go up, that is simply not true, Mr. Speaker. We are all in this together, Mr. Speaker. And rather than try to set up a completely new billing system for SSA, we already have one in existence, and the people of Barbados would expect us, a responsible government, not to go and spend money to replicate something that already exists when we can use what we have already. Mr. Speaker, that is plain old Bajan common sense. So we are not raising anybody's water bill, Mr. Speaker. We're just using the facility of the Barbados Water Authority in order to be able to collect that specific contribution. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the third front, there were some monies also allocated in the budget to deal with this national cleanup and debushing program. And as you well know, the coastline of Barbados is now besieged with sargassum as well. And certainly the efforts of the Barbados Defense Force and all those environmentalists, I think, are well warranted, because this now also is a national problem, and we must encourage Barbadians, wherever possible, to be able to assist on that front, because these are things, Mr. Speaker, that is the responsibility of every Barbadian. And where help can be provided, we are asking Barbadians to lend a hand, because there's nothing that you cannot do right now, Mr. Speaker, that we would ask Barbadians to do to help their country. Any contribution that people can make, Mr. Speaker, will make the world of difference. This government intends to work with all Barbadians, all residents, all those who love Barbados, to make sure that we can move this country to a different place, Mr. Speaker. So let me remind the public, as we seek to wrap up this debate, that what was presented to you in 2016 and then again last year was a complete sham, Mr. Speaker. Because just like they did with the municipal solid waste tax, they took the monies and did not do with those monies what they said they were going to do with the people's money, Mr. Speaker. And the government simply cannot behave as if it can do as it like. Because when you do so, you lose the faith, you lose the trust that the people would have placed in you. And we are very conscious, Mr. Speaker, that as we go about doing the business of the people, that we do so not just to rebuild that trust, not just to rebuild that confidence, but people can actually see, feel, and experience an improvement in the delivery of public services. Mr. Speaker, you're going to hear me talk about this over and over and over. But until the people of this country can see that what they're paying for, they're getting, and they're consistently seeing an improvement in these services, Mr. Speaker, that our work is simply not done as the government of Barbados. Our responsibility now when it comes to the management of not just the tax affairs of this country, but certainly the provision of public services, is to make sure that the standards to which we've grown accustomed, Mr. Speaker, that those standards are not just met, but exceeded. We simply must do right by the people of this country. And so, it is shameful that the people have had to endure what they've endured over the last, certainly 5 years, 10 years. But with the passing of this National Social Responsibility Repeal Bill 2018, Mr. Speaker, I think a lot of Barbadians will sleep easy tonight, knowing that this tax, this flawed tax, will be laid to rest. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the very good reasons for the repeal of this levy, a government must at all times seek to act in the interest of the people, at all times. And this certainly, or the actions of the previous administration with respect to the intent and what they did, I don't know if that qualifies as misleading Parliament. I don't know if that qualifies as being deceptive or whatever the case is. But a government, Mr. Speaker, a government has a responsibility to discharge the affairs of this country in a manner that builds trust, that builds faith, that builds confidence in every single institution of government, such that the people who put their faith in us, the politicians, will know that we are acting in their interests. And so, as I wrap up, Mr. Speaker, I am happy, and I know that you are happy too, sir. And the members of this honorable chamber are equally happy. Because as we canvass the length and breadth of Barbados, certainly leading up to the last general elections, the people of this country, as we told them that we will do this, there are those who suggested that we couldn't get it done because they simply could not see a different way to be able to improve the delivery of public services in this country. We have started the process of delivering on those public services, Mr. Speaker, and this government intends to continue to work hard to make sure not just that the revenue measures introduced last week are effective, but certainly that the appropriate monies go where they're supposed to go so that people in this country can see an improvement in those services. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance is on a journey to restore order to the public finances of this country. And I say to the people of Barbados, it will take time, because every day we are discovering new things, Ministers of government are discovering new things in their various ministries. But rest assured through you, Mr. Speaker, to the people of Barbados, we shall get to the bottom of everything that is going on here, Mr. Speaker, and we shall act accordingly. Mr. Speaker, I beg that the bill be read a second time.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Second.
The question is that the Speaker now leave the chair and the Honourable House be resolved into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Four.
The House is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
Question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All members.
The bill has to be seconded. The motion got it.
All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All honourable members not in favor, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 2 stands part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand in part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All members not in favor, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 stands part.
I beg to second that, Madam Chair.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All honourable members not in favor, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 4 stands part.
I beg to second that, Madam Chair.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour, the Speaker, the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I now report to the Honourable Speaker the passing of one bill. All those in favour, please say aye. You didn't second it. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All members not in favour, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported to me the passing of one bill without amendments. Committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the National Social Responsibility Levy Repeal Bill 2018. Sorry.
No, sir.
2018.
The question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. She's ignored.
Beg to second that, sir.
Question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Speaker, we've come to the end of today's sit-in. I beg to move that the sit-in be adjourned until Tuesday, the 26th of June at 10 a.m.
Second that, sir.
Question is that this honourable House be adjourned until 10 a.m. in the forenoon on the 27th of June, 2018. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those honourable members against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
I beg to move that the sitting be resumed on the 26th. That's what I think.
Question is that this honourable House be adjourned until the 26th of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on the 26th day of June, 2018 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.